So with that, let's see if I can make this work. All right.
Hey.
We have ourselves a text. All right. Abba, would you read our first text, please?
I look at the people milling around the sanctuary and know that, finally, I understand the magic of Kol Nidrei. All these years, the answer was around me, and I didn't see it. It is the people who every year on Yom Kippur fill the synagogues of the world to hear a simple, sad melody sung in a language most of them hardly know. Still they come, often not knowing why, not understanding what draws them, knowing only that this is what Jews do. Religious Jews? Week, and Jews who come but once a year. Jews for whom the holidays are a joy, and Jews for whom the holidays are a mystery. The context. This story, which was written by a cantor, is about a boy whose grandfather tells him that there is magic when Kol Nidrei is sung. By the time the boy becomes a grandfather himself, he finally understands why and says what I just read above. In the meantime, first as a boy, then as a father, and then finally as a grandfather, he comes up with different reasons why the prayer is sung 3 times. I'm going to say chanted 3 times. And a question David's asking us here is, why do you make sure to hear Kol Nidrei, if it's your habit to do so?
Thank you. So, why do you listen to Kol Nidrei? Why do you make sure to be there in some way for Kol Nidrei, if you do?
Tradition.
Tradition. Okay. Others?
It's a tradition. I mean, I've been doing it since I'm a little girl, and it's important. And there's something very beautiful about just being there and experiencing it.
It's one of the few times, I think, during the year in any experience that I feel there's a bit of a level playing field. Because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes like you go to, even to synagogue, you go on Shabbat in certain synagogues, and if you're not part of the bar mitzvah family, sometimes you feel like, you know, a freeloader, and you know, in the different times you're not with the in crowd. I feel Kol Nidrei, as it says in this reading, whether you go to shul frequently or you only go on Kol Nidrei, there's something very equalizing about it, and that speaks to me.
There are certain prayers that give you a feeling. It's very hard to explain, at least for me to explain. It seems to put you on somewhat of an elevated plane, if you will, with perhaps some nearness to whatever it is that is greater than we are. And this is probably the highest of all of those.
All right, let's go on. Ted, would you read our first text, please?
Kol Nidrei text. All vows and all the things we have made forbidden to ourselves, and all our oaths and all consecrated items we have pledged, all explicit promises and all abbreviated promises that we have vowed, sworn, and dedicated from this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, may it come at an auspicious time, we regret having made them. May they be forgiven, eradicated, nullified, and may they not be valid or exist any longer. Our vows shall no longer be vows, our resolutions shall no longer be resolutions, and our oaths shall no longer be oaths.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Text of Kol Nidrei, the prayer we say at the beginning of Yom Kippur evening services. It was written in Aramaic because that was the vernacular of the time, and it was important for everyone to be able to understand it. Contrary to what anti-Semites have said, this text only annuls vows made to God, not to other people nor to the government. Click here to hear it sung.
Thank you. So, Papa, would you do us the honors of singing?
It would help if I am muted. Take two. Kol nidrei v'esarei b'charame v'koname v'chinuye v'kinusei u'shavuot din darna ud istabana ud acharimna v'asarna al nafshatana Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippurim habaleinu letova kul hon ikaradna Kulhon Yehon Sharan Yehon Sharan Shvikin Shvitin Betelin Muvudalin Lasheririn Velagayamin Nidrana La Nidrei Ve'esarana La Esarei Ushevuatana La Shavuot.
Thank you. So you could, if for those of you who are following in the Aramaic, you could see that there are slight variations in the text, and we'll explore at least one of those variations later on. All right, so we'll start with this. What questions does this text raise for you?
narrow question, I think, to start with. It already says in what you've shown us, and it says in a footnote or commentary in every machzor I've seen, that these are only vows to God, not among men, or even this one says not to the government. That anti-Semites say the contrary. I just like to know if that was true and what the basis of saying that is. Because it doesn't say anything like that. And that's apart from the question about how they changed it from a past at a certain time, from the past year to the future year, which seems like a momentous change, which is seldom discussed as a thing. So those are my questions.
Yeah, you're right. The text itself does not specify which vows. In fact, it says all the vows are annulled. That interpretation is based off of other texts around the idea of vows and what kind of vows you can annul and what kind of vows you can't, going back to the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. So even in the Torah, it talks about how you can cancel out something that you or somebody else has said. And then future texts talk about it as well. There's a whole tractate of the Talmud on the topic of vows called Nidrei. And as for the change in intent and going that Nidrei used to say, last year's vows that we didn't keep, we are canceling to next year's vows that we're not able to keep, we're preemptively canceling. We will talk about that further on because that is an important question. What are the questions?
It's also interesting that this refers to vows you have made. It does say nothing about the actions you have taken, whether they were as a result of those vows or not. Some people, I think, have the feeling that it does absolve you of some of the things they've done. I don't think they fully understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you can't undo an action. That's a good point.
The other thing it doesn't include is what the rabbis have told us, that if you wish to be absolved of something you vowed to another individual, you have to actually apologize to that individual. Whereas here, really is no word of apology.
Right. Which is, part of that is because it's only between yourself and yourself, or yourself and God, that you're right, it doesn't affect things between you and another person, for which you would need to seek forgiveness and show that you are truly sorry, which would usually involve an apology.
We never say to God, I'm sorry.
You can.
Oh, in the Ashamnus, we say for a whole bunch of I'm sorries to God.
I mean, we don't actually say we're sorry during the vidui. We recount our sins. We ask God to forgive us, through God's mercy, not through any merit of our own. But there's no actual apology in there.
Okay, I stand corrected. You're right, Ariel.
The Spanish-Portuguese slichot have the vidui in them, and Spanish-Portuguese tachanun also has vidui in it. So I do this a lot.
as far as the comment about the anti-Semites, interpreted this or misinterpreted this to mean that, Jews don't take their vows of any kind, business, whatever, seriously. Unfortunately, I think when I was growing up, and, it's kind of, I don't know what my full recall is, but the Reformed temple that I went to as a child, they didn't have Kol Nidrei. I mean, they had the service, but it was really Mariv. I mean, they didn't have the text of Kol Nidrei. The Old Union Prayer Book didn't have it. And I think it was to beholden to the whole assimilation that, the world at large would think this was, the ways of Jews getting out of things, wouldn't do business with them. So there were certain Jews that bought into this. It wasn't just anti-Semites. So I think it's kind of interesting, that it came back. But there was a time in Reform Judaism when it was eliminated or greatly watered down.
Yep. There's a whole appendix to the source sheet that I'll send out afterwards that talks about the last 1,200 years of Jews trying to squash Kol Nidrei for various reasons, ranging from the Gaonim through the Reform movement for a while. Not anymore, but for a while.
And part of what saved it is the melody. People weren't willing to let go of it because the melody wound up meaning something to them, whether or not the words actually did.
Mm.
Oh, question. Why is it placed at the beginning of the Yom Kippur holiday, if you will? Why that placement as opposed to any other?
Yeah. So the absolution of vows is not something that you can actually do on a holiday. So therefore, Kol Nidrei itself is supposed to be said while it's daylight before Yom Kippur has actually started, technically. And as we'll see if we have time, that's why we wear a talit, because it's still daylight when you start.
This may be outside your remit, David, but since it's in Aramaic, which it was the lingua franca, because it was very important that everybody understand exactly what was being said. Has there been any sort of movement to move Kol Nidrei back into the vernacular?
Not to my knowledge. I would assume that in Israel, Kol Nidrei gets translated into Hebrew in the prayer books in the same way that other things in the Aramaic get translated into Hebrew, even when they don't translate most prayers because it's already in Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be synagogues or rabbis here and there that have decided that, as you said, it's so important and it was in Aramaic originally so people understood what we were saying, that we're going to say it in English or work it into the sermon in English. There's a sermon in the appendix as well, another appendix where it shows the English. But it has not taken off as a movement or a widespread thing to do that yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
David, the question I have is, well, you said that you can't do this on the actual holiday. You can't say this. But why is that?
I think it's because most absolving of vows was business related. And something that you would come before rabbinical court for. And so it was decided that as a general rule, business matters and absolving of vows and rabbinical courts needed to happen during weekday times, not on Shabbat, not on a holiday. So you can certainly forgive somebody interpersonally. And if like they say, I'm sorry about what I said, or I said I was going to do this and I realize I'm not able to, you can one-on-one forgive them for that, but you cannot like officially rabbinical court-wise absolve somebody of a formal vow on a holiday or Shabbat.
David, why is another custom, and again, I don't know if it's because the shuls that I've gone to, but they take out the Torah, all the Torahs they have. And I mean, a lot of times it's kind of like a ceremonial thing because they have all the past presidents parade around with the Torah. But is that a minhag or is there halacha as far as taking the Torahs out? Because then the congregation is actually staring at an empty ark, and there's kind of some symbolism to me and all of that. I'm just kind of wondering what your take is on that, and how much is minhag versus halacha and so on.
Yeah. So I believe it's halacha to take out 2 Torahs because 2 people holding Torahs plus the cantor forms the 3 that you need for a Beit Din, which is needed not only for the absolving of vows, but also for the prologue to Kol Nidrei, which we'll also hopefully look at a little bit, where we say, by the authority of the court above and the court below, we grant permission to pray with sinners, that people who might have been otherwise excommunicated from the community, we say you can pray with them. So you need at least 2 Torahs for that. And during the year, there are a number of situations where you would where you would have a Shabbat with 2 Torahs. There's the occasional situation where it would be helpful to have 3. So I think it was assumed that if you're already taking out 2 and honoring important people with those 2 Torahs, if you have more, you might as well take out more. But you only need 2.
Prologue is interesting because you mentioned sinners, and we normally, at least I normally think of sinners as an act that was done rather than a vow that was taken. And yet we say the prologue to pray with sinners, but the Kol Nidrei is involved with only vows.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that. So on the one hand, you are biblically, I believe, in Numbers, it does say that you're supposed to bring a sin offering if you make a vow. Certainly to be a Nazirite. So there's a lot of ambivalence around taking vows in Judaism. That being said, I think the sinner's part has to do more with the people that you're praying with during Yom Kippur in general, as opposed to specifically those who took vows. Some of this may get to the history of Kol Nidrei, which is a little murky, but it is thought that one possibility is that it was developed by Spanish Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity, not in the 1400s, but in the 700s by the Visigoths. And so they developed this prayer, some people think, to say to God, those vows that we took in the last year to say we will be Christians, we don't really mean them, please absolve us of those. And for the other Jews to be praying with these people who had outwardly betrayed the faith Some people think that those are the ones that are being referred to by sinners, or at least originally.
You mentioned the Nazarites. I understood that this does not absolve the Nazarite vows.
No, I don't believe so, because that can be a longer than 1 year deal, like Samson, for instance. But the idea that if you take a vow, you bring a sin offering was the point being made there. Other questions about the text, or that the text raises for you?
Just an observation. This feels like one of the best examples of a text that shouldn't be read on its surface. Mm-hmm. That it's incredibly evocative due to the melody. I completely agree with that observation, and thank you for chanting it. But the more layers you know about what this prayer may have meant to different people and how it may have been interpreted, totally the better. In my mind, without any doubt, the richer it becomes. And without that, it becomes so opaque and confusing that you can completely understand why the Reform movement, which was dedicated to casting aside a lot of that history, would have found it way too complicated to want to include in the old Union prayer book, right? So knowing it theologically, it's odd to start a year by making a statement like this. Mm-hmm. When you've just finished the 10 days and the month of Elul and all the preparation and all the cheshbon nefesh and everything, this is very peculiar. So it begs to be unpacked and learned, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, let's do some more unpacking. All right, so the history of Kol Nidrei, from This Is Real and You Were Completely Unprepared. We've actually just talked about this. So we'll skip it. All right, so from Entering the High Holidays by Reuven Hammer. Norma, would you read this, please?
Accepting its origin, the history of Kol Nidrei is well documented. We can date its first appearance to 8th century Babylonia, where it was opposed vehemently by the Geonim. In 879-7 CE, Amram Gaon cites a Hebrew text of Kol Nidrei, but disapproves of it, calling it a foolish custom. Sadia Gaon accepted the text, and in 1000 CE, another of the Geonim, approved a revised text, making it clear that it was to be understood as a plea for mercy rather than a legal annulment of vows. Gradually, the custom of reciting Kol Nidrei spread both to the land of Israel and to Europe. There too, it encountered opposition and was regarded as an invalid practice that made light of vows. The opposition was overcome when Rabbi Meir ben Rabbi Samuel, the son-in-law of Rashi, implemented the Talmudic concept of permitting the cancellation of vows in advance and changed the tenses in the prayer to the future. This change was endorsed by the great authority Rabbanu Tam, but the required changes were never officially made in the generally accepted text. The traditional text of Kol Nidrei therefore speaks of annulling vows from now until next Yom Kippur, but uses the past tense in speaking about them. The final changes were made in the 13th century by Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, who introduced the following formula: by authority of the heavenly court, and turned the verses at the end of the prayer into a congregational response. Context: this is from Reuven Hammer's 1998 book, Entering the High Holy Days. Reuven Hammer is a scholar of Jewish liturgy, and this book walks through the history and themes of each part of the service for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The opening formula says, by authority of the heavenly court and the court on earth, we permit prayer with those who have transgressed. Why might this be an important addition?
Thank you.
They weren't allowed to pray with those who have sinned. The synagogue would be empty.
Not if they'd sinned too much.
Is that the Avaryonim? Is
Yeah.
that the word? Is that really sinner?
It depends how you translate it. Some people say it's Iberians. Some people say it's from Avar, those who transgress, who cross over. I think there's one more reading on it that I'm forgetting, but it tends to be the common interpretation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When it says by the authority of the heavenly court and the court on earth, now I know, as we talked about in your answer to my other question, was that, it's kind of reenacting the Beit Din when you hold the Torahs, and it's the court, and that's why it's during daylight and all of that. But does that mean that simultaneously God and the angels are conducting a court where we're the defendant, so to speak, while we're doing this on earth? I mean, seeing that in the same sentence, there's a lot to that, I think.
Yeah. I think it does suggest that.
What's interesting is the way we talk about the court, the earthly court of kings, if you will. It's more the palace and the realm rather than a legal court at the time, even though the king has final say about everything. I wonder if this is the court being in session or something other than that.
It's B'Shiva Shalma, B'Shiva Shalmata. So it's the sitting of above and the sitting of below. Ve'al hamakom ve'al hakahal, and with the knowledge of God and with the knowledge of the congregation. So I see how the word court could either feel like the palace court or the judicial court. I think it is the judgment court, whether that is being done in a palace setting or being done in a judicial setting. If that makes sense. All right, let's explore our next area. Why are the Ashkenazi and Sephardi versions different? All right, Morris, would you read our first text in this section, please?
If a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips. This is from the biblical book of Numbers, It is from a whole chapter about vows, promises, and keeping a word. According to this text, is there any way to get out of vows, oaths, and obligations?
Thank you.
Well, if he's making a pledge to God, he can go to Kol Nidrei, right? And get out of it that way?
Nowadays, we would say he could. What about according to the text?
Right.
If I'm reading it, or my interpretation of this is that the man, the person,
sleeping over tonight,
shall not break his pledge, but it doesn't say that God couldn't let him out of his pledge.
That's true. You'd have to be able to hear what God was saying to you. But well, I suppose
in the reading just before this one, didn't the rabbis kind of presumptuously say that God would release you, the heavenly court?
The heavenly court only says that you can pray with the sinners.
But they were saying that that's what God said, that it was...
They were saying that, yes, that is what God said. So are you saying that if they can say that that's what God said about that, then they can say that God can let you out of your pledge?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, that's a logical train of thought.
But this text from Bamidbar is centuries before the Kol Nidrei was written. Then was the Kol Nidrei a counterpoint to this in the text, you think? Because it came so much later. Like a kind of like a loophole or something?
It certainly was aware of this text. So in the Hebrew, it says, Ish kidor neder ladonai, oishava shivuar le'asor isar onavsho. So that's three different ways to say, that's of saying promise. It's in the English, it says vow, oath, pledge, obligation, I guess. And those three terms reappear in Kol Nidrei in their Aramaic forms, along with a couple other synonyms. So certainly Kol Nidrei is in response to this verse, and is aware of it. All right, let's see what the Talmud has to say about this. Paul, would you read this text, please?
And one who desires that his vows not be upheld for the entire year should stand up on Rosh Hashanah and say, any vow that I take in the future should be void. And this is a statement that is effective, provided he remembers at the time of the vow that his intent at the beginning of the year was to render it void. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet, Nidrei, which is about vows. It comments on a Mishnah that says if one wants to make a fake vow so as to convince somebody to do something, you just have to say, any vow which I take in the future is void. According to this text, is there any way to get out of a vow, promise, or obligation that you have already made? Wouldn't that be B'li Neder?
B'li Neder is the Hebrew phrase that means without vow. So that's...
the words of making a vow. Okay, so that's not right.
Right, it's connected, but it's saying that that I'm specifically not vowing here. Otherwise, you get into these sorts of troubles when people think you've made a vow.
So any vow I made last year is void before I even make it. Because I went to Nidrei last year.
So if you went to Nidrei last year, then any vow that you made last year is void because of the Nidrei from last year. But last year's Nidrei didn't say anything about the year before. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
And only if you, at the moment of making the vow, recall your forward-thinking commitment, that you now have the ability to nullify vows. Is that what it's saying?
It's kind of like if a vow encloses you into something, then this awareness that you planned on all your vows being void. It's like if you are playing Monopoly and you get sent to jail and you have a get out of jail free card, but you don't remember that you have it, then you can't use it.
It's a very memorable metaphor. Thank you.
Yeah.
But this is almost the opposite of what I would think ethical training would be, or ethics, because you could almost say that this only works if you remember that you took the vow to make it void, and it really should be the other way around. That, in other words, Kol Nidrei should, or this formula should work if I inadvertently, miss the mark. So we say not intentional. This is putting intention in there, and it's a little bit curious, I mean, it just doesn't seem to be cohesive.
I go to Kol Nidrei in September, and in October, I go to a court and as a witness, and take a vow that I will take a vow to God that I will tell the truth, then I can still lie on the stand, and I'm free.
Yes, you're right. It doesn't coordinate with like common law, and it's supposed to be it's a law. So that's where I have some issues here.
The other piece of that is Dina Malchuta Dina, the law of the land supersedes all religious law.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to go that far, because after all, you have the Ten Commandments, and it says you shall not make a false vow. You don't get out of that requirement by this device, I hope.
Was the Ten Commandments talking about vows or bearing false witness? That's a little different.
Tell the truth in court is what you said. That was
right, but I'm just trying to think of all the implications. I mean, it's very, I don't know, like I said, it just seems counter any kind of ethical standard.
So Don, you're saying that it's counter to ethical things because here it says that you have to remember during the course of the year that you had said that everything was void. Otherwise, it's not void.
Yeah, because what I'm trying to say is you could almost excuse a sin, if you want to call it whatever, a wrongdoing, if you forgot. But in this particular case, thing you're supposed to remember that you said you were going to automatically be absolved of everything wrong that you do in the future. That's where I'm having some.
That begs the whole ethical question that's brought together by the Kol Nidrei, by this whole formula. And I can't use that expression, cross my fingers, I've been told. Can you double triangulate your fingers? So you're saying, Don, it's kind of like if you say the vow and you have your fingers crossed, then you're okay. But that's not, clearly can't be the intent.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't sound like, I mean, we're interpreting in different ways, which is what this is all about. but I can't imagine the intent of this would be to get somebody off scot-free just by remembering that you know you can get out of it.
I think here the context is probably more useful than it's been on almost anything else that I presented it on all year. That this is commenting on a Mishnah that says that if you want to make a fake vow, so as to convince somebody to do something, then you can do that if you've made this formula. So, for instance, a fake vow, the example that we give in the Mishnah is like, I swear to God, I'm never going to eat with you again if you do that. And then the person does it again. You say, okay, I'm not eating with you. They say, okay, I'm really sorry, I will change my ways. They change their ways, and now you want to eat with them again. But you just made a vow to God that you wouldn't.
But what happens to the qualification that you introduced at the beginning? And I think these are all different sources probably, that these are only vows to God and not between us.
So you're asking, how does that affect?
How would that square with the example you just gave, or that the Mishnah is giving, that this is a vow with an explicit aim to get leverage over somebody's behavior? It seems I'm going to assume these are disparate sources, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's because that's a vow that you make to God to convince somebody else.
It's really theater then.
Right, exactly.
Or is it fraud? It's extremely troubling. It always has been to me. I think it will continue to be. I don't know. We say in Yizkor service, it says, I pledge charity in the memory of my departed ancestor. And then in some Sidurim, at least in the Orthodox ones, I think, it says bli neder, so that you say that, then you're okay. You're not making a vow in case you don't make the charitable contribution. But it says it right in there, and you're not cheating any person.
Yeah, so that gets to one of the big ideas or big thoughts about Kol Nidrei, which is that presumably at the time of Yizkor, assuming that you know what these words mean that you're saying, which, otherwise you've got a whole different issue of saying words that you don't understand what they're saying. If you know that you're saying, I pledge charity in the memory of the person, then presumably you did intend to do that. And you had good intentions, and then whatever came up, but it was a sincere pledge at the time. And Kol Nidrei recognizes that we have a lot of intentions at the beginning of a new year. And then things come up. Kol Nidrei fall of 2019, really good example. Like, people had a lot of sincere New Year's resolutions, so to speak. Things that they said to themselves and to God that they were going to do, to work on, to try to accomplish. Nobody saw that there would be a pandemic before Kol Nidrei 2020. So things come up. Sometimes really big things come up. but our intention is sincere, presumably, assuming that we're not talking about these situations like in the Mishnah here, that like we really do intend to do things, and we're saying to God, like, God, we recognize that there may be things that prevent us from doing what we sincerely intend to do at this point of the year, and we ask your preemptive forgiveness for that. Recognizing the time, I want to finish this section at least. So as we saw before, Kol Nidrei had been about the vows from the past year, that it said, God, please forgive our vows from the past year that we weren't able to keep. And then there were a lot of people that had trouble with that. And Rabbeinu Tam, who was European, changed it to, or went along with the change, gave his approval to a change that said it should be for the coming year. Because in the Torah, it says, once you made that vow, you can't change it. But in the Talmud, it says, you can say ahead of time, God, I might not be able to keep a promise that I make in the future. So that change from past tense to future tense was accepted in Central and Eastern Europe, but it was not accepted in the Spanish, Portuguese communities and their diaspora. And so that's why there's a difference between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi versions of Kol Nidrei. Questions about that?
Yes, did God ever agree with that change?
Unclear. But that was several hundred years ago, more than several hundred years ago.
I would think God's the one who would have to accept it before we could actually put it into practice.
That's true. At this point, as the rabbi said in the Talmud, Lo b'shamayim hi, it's not in the heavens, to quote from the Torah and take that terribly out of context. So, you know, God gave us the Torah and Judaism, and we just do the best we can with it. All right, so I'm going to stop the share. Thank you all for joining me this evening.